No ship appeared on the auger arrays, no warp signature registered. Yet something fell from the black sky, leaving only questions and the acrid stench of damnation in its wake. In the 41st millennium, the laws of physics are merely suggestions, and faith reshapes reality itself. But what happens when something from beyond the veil of stars arrives with its own immutable laws? This is the Great Crusade, a time when the Emperor's light promised salvation through the annihilation of all difference. And now, into that brittle light, a golden anomaly had arrived. If you're hungry for tales of what-if scenarios that shake the foundations of the 41st millennium, hit subscribe and join the crusade for more content. The narrative follows the third-person perspective, primarily tracking the Man of Steel's terrifying and inspiring impact on the nascent Imperium. The planet, designated Mundus Planus by the Administratum, was undergoing its final bloody compliance phase, a euphemism for the systematic dismantling of the remaining planetary defense forces and the re-education of its population. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of dried blood, the acrid smoke of burnt promethium, and the incessant grating static of countless Vox reports. Sergeant Kratos, a hardened veteran of the Imperial Fists Legion, stood amidst the ruins of what had been the planetary capital's central defense bunker. His yellow ceramite armor was coated in a fine ochre dust. His squad was engaged in the grim work of securing a subterranean complex where a cabal of techno-barbarian warlords had made their final stand. The deep, heavy boom of their demolition charges was the only rhythm of life left on this doomed rock. Then, the rhythm broke. A light, brighter than the focused beam of a las cannon and faster than any ship recorded in the Imperium's burgeoning annals, tore a rift in the atmosphere. It was a blinding, instantaneous flash that overloaded the visual receptors of Kratos' helmet and screamed across the Voxnet like 10,000 tortured souls. It did not so much land as stop abruptly, impacting the ground in a detonation of displaced earth and stone that sent a seismic shockwave across kilometers, extinguishing all nearby fires and silencing all Vox traffic in a 3-kilometer radius. Kratos, a warrior who had endured orbital bombardment and direct plasma fire, found himself momentarily disoriented, his genetic enhancements struggling to recalibrate his senses. This was not a weapon. It was an event. Kratos and his remaining 4 brothers of the Imperial Fists advanced cautiously toward the epicenter, a crater 30 meters deep, the rock at its bottom fused into dark, unnatural glass. There was no telltale metallic wreckage of a crashed vessel, no melted ceramite, only a pervasive scent of ozone and the deep, rich smell of turned soil. And then they saw him. Standing at the base of the crater, completely unharmed and miraculously pristine, was a being of impossible anatomy. He was clad in a suit of primary colors, bright blue, scarlet red, and a vibrant gold emblem, colors that should not have existed in the grim reality of the 41st millennium. The contrast with the gray and gold of the Imperial Fists was immediate and absolute, a beacon of defiant hope in a universe of iron and dogma. The man, if he could be called that, looked up. His face was a mask of confusion, his eyes scanning the ruins and the heavily armed figures surrounding him. He was a perfect specimen of human physique, but radiating a low, controlled energy that made the air around him crackle. This was Kal-El Krypton, a refugee from a dead universe who had breached the veil of reality through a fluke of quantum physics and the raw, untamed power of a Great Crusade-era warp storm. He was operating at 100% capacity. The G-type star of Mundus Planus' system fed his cells, and the immense psychic pressure of the 40K universe only served as an ambient power source he was unconsciously processing. Before Kratos could bark a challenge or raise his bolter, the ground around them gave a final sickening lurch. The tectonic instability caused by the impact now collapsed a massive, millennia-old dome structure perched precariously on the crater's edge. A 300-ton section of ferrocrete and ancient plastisteel began to shear and fall directly toward the 4 Space Marines positioned nearest the lip. Kratos raised his bolter, prepared to lay down covering fire against the inevitable catastrophic debris. But the figure in red and blue moved. Not with the calculated efficiency of a Primarch, nor the blazing rush of a jet bike, but with a pure, unadulterated speed that defied observation. The Space Marine's enhanced eyes tracked the motion as a mere blur, a flash of red that was there and then gone. In the space of one heartbeat, Kal-El had closed the 30-meter distance, ascended the sheer cliff face of the crater, and positioned himself directly underneath the descending tonnage. The sound that followed was not the tearing screech of metal, but a dull, concussive thud as the Man of Steel caught the entire collapsing section in his bare hands. He held it. The structure that could have flattened Kratos' entire squad held it for a silent, impossible moment. He did not strain. He did not grunt. He looked over the lip of the crater, his eyes meeting the visor of Sergeant Kratos. With a gentle, controlled heave that nonetheless sent a tremor through the ground, he tossed the debris aside, placing it meticulously on a cleared, open stretch of ruined plaza, where it settled with a soft sigh of displaced air. The Space Marines, warriors who lived by the Imperial truth, whose faith was absolute, whose purpose was single and clear, stood frozen. Their augurs registered the kinetic output. Their implants confirmed the structural mass. The event was physically impossible, yet it had occurred. Kratos lowered his bolter, the heavy weapon feeling suddenly like a child's toy in his hand. The initial mystery was solved. The golden anomaly was an entity of supreme, incalculable power. The conflict spark was struck. How does the Imperium of Man, which tolerates no peers and worships only one human, react to a god who falls from the sky? The Man of Steel dropped back into the crater, landing silently before Kratos, dust settling around his red boots. His voice, perfectly articulated through the silence, was rich, melodic, and confused. "I don't know where I am, but are you all right? That structure was collapsing." The silence that followed Superman's simple question was thicker than the polluted air of Mundus Planus. Sergeant Kratos, a son of Terra who had been forged in the crucible of Sol's orbital conflicts and honed by the Emperor's own genetic artistry, stared at the impossible being. His training, drilled into him over centuries of psycho-conditioning, dictated only 2 responses to an unmatched threat: total compliance or immediate, overwhelming violence. This entity offered a third, maddening option: unsolicited, unhesitating aid. "Identify yourself, Xenos," Kratos finally managed, his voice processed and distorted by his voxcaster, masking the tremor of professional awe in his throat. He did not raise his bolter again. The display of power was too great. A single shot would be an insult. The Space Marine's mind raced, attempting to categorize the entity. Was it a highly advanced Eldar construct? A demon of the warp, masquerading as a hero? Or, worst of all, an independent human of such unimaginable physical potential that he fundamentally undermined the unique sanctity of the Primarchs? Kal-El lowered his hands slowly, sensing the shift in atmospheric tension. He looked at the immense, towering figures in power armor, the iconic visage of the Imperial Fists chapter. Yellow and gold, defiant and staunch. He saw no malice, only intense, fearful rigidity. "My name is Kal-El," he replied, using the name he had carried from Krypton, hoping the alien sound might soothe the tension. "I was on a reconnaissance mission near a spatial anomaly, and then I was here. This world is dying. Who are you?" Kratos gave a quick, sharp order over the tactical channel, bypassing the local Vox interference. "Squad Beta, secure a cordon. Priority Gamma, do not engage. Wait for Legate command."
To Kal-El, he responded with the imperial truth, a doctrine that had unified 1,000,000 worlds. We are the Space Marines of the Emperor's Great Crusade. This planet is under the jurisdiction of the Imperium of Man. You are alien. Your presence is an unsanctioned intrusion into the Emperor's work. You will submit to a physical and psychoanalysis. The Space Marines began to move, their heavy boots thudding against the fused earth. They didn't point their weapons, but formed a highly disciplined circle, a classic containment formation designed to withstand a tank charge, not a single individual who had just nonchalantly lifted a skyscraper. Kal-El looked at the ruins around them, the devastation that had clearly been wrought by the Imperial forces, not the planetary defenders. He saw the bodies of the non-compliant humans, their weapons crude, but their desperation real. "I will not be contained," Kal-El said, the firmness in his voice laced with the conviction of a man whose moral authority was absolute. "But I will cooperate. I have no quarrel with you. I only wish to understand what happened here, and if I can help stop the conflict." A new sound entered the ruins, the distinctive, heavy footsteps of a dreadnought, accompanied by the purring engine of a Rhino armored transport. The command element had arrived. The hatch of the Rhino opened, and out stepped a figure whose very aura commanded attention. Captain General Argus of the Imperial Fists, accompanied by a retinue of Imperial Army advisors and tech priests. Argus, encased in custom-forged Terminator armor, stood a head taller than even Kratos, his face scarred and grim. He carried the weight of the Crusade's bloody mission in every move. The tech priests, however, were not interested in military protocol. They were captivated. Their complex augers, which were designed to detect everything from warp signatures to residual radiation from ancient weaponry, were screaming incomprehensible data. Pure kinetic energy, zero thermodynamic output, non-warp signature, possible living standard template construct STC fragment. They saw in Superman a puzzle, a technological mystery, a perfect human design capable of defying universal mechanics. They were already calculating the possibilities of reverse engineering his biology, their binaric chants intensifying to an unnerving mechanical chorus. Captain General Argus raised a hand, silencing his vox speed. He looked at Kal-El, taking in the clean lines, the powerful, effortless posture, and the eyes that held a boundless, almost naive hope. Argus was a pragmatist. He saw an unmatched weapon, a potential key to faster compliance. "Your offer to cooperate is accepted, alien, but cooperation means absolute adherence to my command. Your actions prevented the catastrophic loss of my Marines. For this, I am indebted. Now, tell me what manner of power allows a man to fly and defy gravity, and why you carry the iconography of a feral cult." Kal-El paused. Iconography of a feral cult. He touched the shield on his chest, the symbol of his house, a sign of hope. "This is not a cult sign," he explained, his tone calm despite the insult. "It is the crest of my family. The power is a natural product of my biology reacting to this star, and I believe I was brought here through a rift in space-time." Argus's internal assessment was complete. The entity was clearly an alpha-level P-psychic anomaly, perhaps a mutation from an unexplored corner of the galaxy or a hyper-evolved xenos, but his power was real and his initial action was demonstrably beneficial. The Captain General made a choice that would reverberate through the Great Crusade. "You will be brought to the vengeful spirit," Argus commanded. "You will be presented to the War Master and the Emperor. Your fate will be decided by the highest authority in the galaxy. Attempt to resist, Kal-El, and I will unleash every weapon at my disposal, even if it means sacrificing this world and myself to contain the threat. You are a power too great to ignore, and therefore too dangerous to be left unsecured." As the Space Marines closed in, their movements still rigid and respectful, Kal-El did not resist. He could have scattered them like dust, vanished into the sky, or reduced the Rhino to molten slag. But the faces of these soldiers, scarred and determined, spoke of a hard-won, desperate loyalty. He chose the path of the diplomat, the path of peaceful first contact. He allowed the massive yellow-armored figures to escort him toward the waiting gunship, his mind already churning on the implications of a great crusade that seemed to conquer more than it liberated. He realized his power was not diminished, but his moral framework was about to be tested as never before. The journey to the War Master's flagship would be his trial by fire. A swift and brutal introduction to the true atmosphere of the 41st millennium, a galaxy where every heroic deed was just one more data point for a ruthless, ultimate authority.
The journey from Mundus Planus to the flagship Vengeful Spirit was an education in the scale and terrifying infrastructure of the fledgling Imperium. Kal-El was transported aboard a heavily escorted Thunderhawk gunship, strapped into a containment harness made of adamantium alloys, a purely symbolic gesture, as he could have parted the metal with a shrug, yet he remained compliant. The interior of the gunship was utilitarian, smelling of oil, sweat, and ozone. Through a reinforced viewport, he watched the transition from the shattered compliance world to the void. The sight of the burgeoning Imperial fleet, hundreds of colossal vessels hanging in the black like monstrous armored deities, gave him a profound, unsettling sense of scale. The ships were functional, brutalist, and possessed of a grim, terrifying majesty. Upon boarding the Vengeful Spirit, the flagship of the 16th Legion and the personal vessel of Primarch Horus Lupercal, Kal-El was subjected to a thorough, if ineffective, series of tests by a cohort of tech priests from the Martian Mechanicum. They employed everything from rudimentary bioscanners to arcane, millennia-old psychic resonance emitters, all of which returned the same impossible data, a near-perfect human genome, but with a solar energy processing capacity that defied the laws of established physics and a power output they could only classify as divine or demonic. Their binaric chatter rose to a frantic pitch, torn between the Imperial Truth's anti-xenos mandate and the Mechanicum's absolute, worshipful lust for new technology. The ultimate destination was the Vengeful Spirit's primary audience chamber, a cavernous space of dark marble and gold inlay designed to impose absolute subservience. There, seated on a simple but imposing throne, was the War Master himself, Horus Lupercal, the favored son of the Emperor, and a presence that radiated charisma, intelligence, and lethal, controlled authority. Flanking him were two figures whose auras of power were exponentially greater. One was Sanguinius, the magnificent and tragically beautiful Primarch of the Blood Angels, whose serene yet watchful gaze seemed to penetrate Kal-El's very soul. The other was a figure of indescribable, glorious luminosity. This was the Emperor of Mankind. He did not wear armor, but a simple robe of gold and white. His sheer psychic presence was a palpable force, a tide of focused will and power that dwarfed every other being in the room. His eyes, luminous orbs of gold, were fixed upon Kal-El. For the first time since his arrival, Kal-El felt a primal, instinctive sense of danger. The Emperor was not merely a powerful man, he was a psychic force of nature, a living god who held the entire human race in the palm of his mind. The Emperor spoke, his voice not a sound transmitted through the air, but a direct, resonant thought in Kal-El's mind. A voice that spoke of ancient star maps, forgotten histories, and the crushing weight of a galaxy of conflict. You are called Kal-El. You fell from the void between the realities. We have tracked your energy signature. You are not of the warp. You are not a daemon. You are a biological anomaly, powered by starlight. You are, in essence, an alien god. Kal-El, recovering swiftly from the psychic assault of the Emperor's voice, stood his ground.
"I am only a man, sire." He used the title instinctively. "I come from a world where I was taught to use my abilities to help others." Horus leaned forward, a casual gesture that nonetheless radiated menace. "A noble sentiment, Kal-El. We are in the business of helping humanity too, by conquest, by unification, and by the purging of all who oppose us. Your power, by the estimates of my tech priests, exceeds that of any single living creature we have ever encountered, save one. That makes you either the greatest asset to the Great Crusade or its gravest threat." The Emperor's gold eyes flickered, absorbing the true measure of Kal-El's moral core. He saw the boundless hope, the absolute refusal to kill, and the inherent idealism that was utterly alien to the 41st millennium. He also saw the potential. "Your abilities are a gift of the void. They can be used to shepherd worlds into compliance faster than any legion, saving untold billions of Imperial Guard lives and reducing the need for exterminatus. But a gift uncontrolled is a danger." The Emperor's proposition was direct. "Submit to my authority, accept the Imperial truth, and join the Great Crusade. You will be assigned to Horus, my War Master. You will be given the task of leading the compliance of worlds where your unique gifts can save lives and expedite the inevitable. In return, you will have access to the knowledge and protection of the Imperium. Refuse, and you are simply an uncontrolled xenos element, a threat to the stability of the burgeoning empire, and you will be annihilated." This was the first major test of Kal-El's moral framework. He looked at the three beings of immense power, two of whom were clearly weapons of conquest, and one was the very architect of the brutal pragmatism. He saw Horus, whose easy authority masked a deep, ruthless conviction. He saw the cold logic of the Emperor, who saw him not as a savior, but as a supremely effective tool. "I accept your offer to help the people of this Imperium," Kal-El said, his voice ringing with conviction, but his eyes holding a subtle defiance. "I will aid in the liberation of worlds, but I will not enact the brutality of your compliance. I will not kill, and I will not allow the murder of innocents." Horus smiled, a chilling, predatory gesture that was instantly masked. "An interesting condition, alien. The galaxy is a place of necessary slaughter. You will learn, as we have all learned, that you cannot save everyone, and sometimes the greatest hope is found in the sharpest blade." The Emperor made his ultimate decision, projecting one final powerful thought. "You believe you are the herald of a better way. I permit you this chance. Go with Horus. Witness the true cost of unity. Your moral code is the very thing I wish to test. If you prove the utility of mercy, I will adjust the tenets of the Imperial truth. If you falter, you will prove my necessity. You will be designated the Golden Anomaly, and you will serve the Great Crusade." The stage was set. Superman, operating at full power but tethered by his absolute morality, was now an unwilling recruit in the most ruthless campaign of conquest the galaxy had ever known, under the direct tutelage of the one Primarch whose fall would define the future: Horus Lupercal.
The newly designated Golden Anomaly was integrated into the War Master's retinue, a bizarre addition to the 16th Legion, the Luna Wolves, soon to be the Sons of Horus. Horus Lupercal, with his characteristic blend of charm and tactical genius, treated Kal-El not as a threat, but as an intellectual problem. The Primarch was genuinely curious about the limits of Kal-El's power, and more importantly, the inflexibility of his moral code. The smell of the flagship's vast, oiled hangar bays, the constant low-level hum of its reactors, and the deep, pervasive air of absolute military might became Kal-El's new atmosphere. Horus's method of tutelage was simple: Total, unfiltered exposure to the Great Crusade's realpolitik. Kal-El was present for the strategic briefings, listening to the casual, cold calculus of orbital bombardment and compliance by fear. He watched as Horus, with a wave of his hand, condemned entire populations to decades of forced labor or immediate summary execution for minor transgressions against the imperial truth. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the violence, justified by the ultimate goal of galactic unification, began to chip away at Kal-El's naive hope. The first true test came on the world of Xantis Beta, an agri-world that had slipped back into techno-feudalism and maintained an aggressive, non-compliant religion that venerated a serpentine, multi-limbed entity. Imperial Guard regiments were bogged down in trench warfare against fanatical, well-equipped local militias. Horus dispatched Kal-El with a small detachment of Lunawolves, including the formidable first captain, Ezekiel Abaddon. Your task, Anomaly, is to expedite the compliance of the primary citadel. We need the plasma generators intact. You have the raw power. Use it to neutralize their command structure without resorting to mass slaughter. Show us how mercy can be efficient. Kal-El flew down to Xantis Beta, the very air of the planet heavy with the scent of spent shell casings and industrial fertilizer. He found the entrenched militia, thousands of desperate men and women armed with autoguns and crude rocket launchers, galvanized by their bizarre faith. He bypassed the trench lines, flying at supersonic speed directly into the heart of the Citadel, a massive fortress built from recycled orbital debris. His actions were a masterpiece of non-lethal application of power. He moved faster than thought, creating sonic booms that stunned entrenched defenders and instantly disarming thousands. He tore down the fortress walls not with explosion, but by carefully peeling the adamantium plates away and placing them neatly on the ground. He neutralized heavy weapons by freezing the barrels with his breath or vaporizing the targeting mechanisms with surgical bursts of heat vision. The Lunawolves, witnessing this impossible spectacle, could only stand and watch, their bolters silent. Abaddon, in particular, watched with a grim, calculating detachment, recognizing a weapon that was both unparalleled and dangerously unreliable. Within an hour, the Citadel was secured. The command structure, a grotesque priesthood dedicated to the Serpent God, was captured and delivered to the Lunawolves. The thousands of militia, terrified but completely unharmed, were now standing in stunned silence amidst the ruins of their own defense. Compliance is achieved, War Master, Kal-El voxed back, the pride of a job well done in his voice. Minimal structural damage, zero casualties. The militia is contained and ready for re-education. Horus's response was immediate and chilling. Impressive, Anomaly, truly impressive. However, your mission parameters were incomplete. The populace of Xantis Beta worships a xenos entity. The imperial truth dictates that such corruption must be utterly excised to prevent contagion. Your mercy is a liability. It leaves the source of rebellion alive. First Captain Abaddon, take 2 companies, execute the command structure. Then, systematically purge the remaining militia. This must be an object lesson. The cost of non-compliance is total annihilation. Kal-El felt a cold physical shock, a violation of every instinct he had. He had saved these people, and now they were to be slaughtered by the very forces he had aided. He looked at the thousands of disarmed, terrified citizens, many just young men and women caught in a religious frenzy, and his absolute moral code kicked in. Negative, War Master. Kal-El's voice crackled over the secure channel, his tone shifting from cooperative to dangerously defiant. I secured this world under the premise of liberation, not extermination. I will not allow this massacre. Abaddon, already moving his companies, paused, looking toward the source of the golden figure. You defy the War Master's direct order, Xenos? Kal-El took a position between the stunned militia and the advancing lines of the Lunawolves. I defy the brutality of this order. I will not move. If you wish to kill these people, you will have to go through me. His eyes began to glow, the nascent power of his heat vision a barely contained threat. The smell of ozone returned, stronger now, laced with defiance. The conflict philosophy had been tested, and the schism was immediate. Superman had chosen to stand against the very power he had pledged to serve, prioritizing the lives of the defeated over the pragmatic doctrine of the imperial truth. Abaddon, recognizing the gravity of the situation, engaging a being of such power without the War Master's explicit, detailed sanction was folly, signaled a halt. The tension was a razor wire stretched taut over the cratered ground. Kal-El stood alone, a solitary, colorful defiance against the monochrome tide of the Great Crusade, an individual agency asserting itself against the absolute will of the Imperium. Horus had his answer. The golden anomaly was not a tool. He was an independent moral agent, and thus an ultimate threat.
The standoff on Xantus Beta lasted 3 agonizing minutes, a lifetime in the accelerated reality of a compliance action. On the planet's surface, the Lunawolves, under Abaddon's watchful, furious command, maintained their rigid firing lines, bolters aimed at the back of the golden figure. In orbit, the vengeful spirit's command deck was gripped by a tense silence. The War Master, Horus Lupercal, leaned back in his command chair, his expression unreadable, watching the Vox feed from the planet's surface. "He does not bluff," Horus finally stated, his voice a low, analytical rumble. "He is prepared to engage an entire company of Astartes to save a population he does not know. His moral programming is an absolute constraint." Abaddon, over the Vox, spoke with barely concealed rage. "War Master, his defiance is an insult to the legions and a liability to the compliance. He must be eliminated now, before his insubordination corrupts the very idea of imperial authority. Grant me permission to engage with lethal force." The air around Abaddon smelled of expensive, exotic Martian incense and barely contained rage. Horus considered this. He could order the attack, and 1,000 years of strategic experience told him the Lunawolves would ultimately win, but the cost would be immense, and the psychological impact on the burgeoning Imperium, the Emperor's failure to control his own recruit, would be a devastating blow to the Imperial truth. "Hold your fire, First Captain," Horus commanded, the decision heavy with political nuance. "Do not engage. The anomaly has secured the Citadel and its technology. That much of the mission is complete. The fate of the populace is now an imperial administrative matter. Withdraw your men. We will address this anomaly's transgression in the highest court." On the surface, Kal-El slowly let the glow fade from his eyes. His heat vision had not been fired, but the threat had been clear. When Abaddon's measured order to withdraw reached his ears, he felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by the profound realization that this was merely a temporary reprieve, not a victory. He had saved these lives for now, but the fundamental conflict remained. As the Lunawolves retreated, their heavy boots kicking up the dust, Kal-El turned to the bewildered militia. They stared at him, not with gratitude, but with a new, alien mixture of terror and dawning primitive awe. He had challenged the invincible golden-armored destroyers and survived. To them, he was now a greater, kinder god, or perhaps the serpent's god's own champion manifested to save them. He spent the next few hours simply stabilizing the Citadel, demonstrating non-aggressive competence, a being of godlike power who chose to repair structural damage with focused heat vision rather than annihilate, and who brought fresh, clean water from a deep underground aquifer with a carefully drilled passage. Back on a vengeful spirit, the atmosphere was toxic. Kal-El, standing before Horus, found himself subjected to the Primarch's full, focused fury, masked only by his cold professionalism. The air smelled of expensive, exotic Martian incense and barely contained rage. "You have committed an act of blatant heresy against the imperial truth," Horus stated, his voice dangerously level. "You have placed the life of a single corrupted population over the stability of an entire galactic empire. You have demonstrated that your personal moral code is a greater priority than the Emperor's will. That
Anomaly is the definition of a threat. My morality is the only thing I have left from my home, Kal-El argued. The memory of Krypton's destruction fueled his conviction. I saw what unchecked power and a willingness to compromise principle did to my people. I will not repeat that mistake. You speak of unity, War Master, but I see a doctrine of terror. Unity cannot be built on an ocean of blood. It must be built on trust. Horus scoffed, his hands gripping the arms of his command chair. Trust is the luxury of a stable empire, not the tool of a nascent one. You do not understand the sheer, overwhelming evil that lurks in the void. Every faction we conquer, every cult we purge is a potential threat to the entire race. We make hard choices so that in 1,000 years there are no choices left to make, only peace. The Primarch then laid down the final decree of the Emperor's judgment. The Emperor has considered your actions. You are too valuable to destroy, and too dangerous to be a soldier. Effective immediately, you are relieved of all combat compliance duties. You will be held aboard the Vengeful Spirit until your long-term fate is determined. You are a biological anomaly, and we shall treat you as such. An object for study, not an agent of war. You will not leave this ship. This is your final chance for compliance. Kal-El accepted the sentence. He was confined to a specially prepared laboratory-cum quarters. It was comfortable, designed by Horus to show respect for the Emperor's guest, but it was still a cage. This isolation, however, gave him what he truly needed: time to observe. His super-hearing picked up every whisper across the colossal ship, the strategizing of the Primarchs, the prayers of the serfs, and the subtle, insidious influence of something else. While confined, one Vox intercept caught his attention, a faint, almost subliminal signal emanating from the deepest, least used sections of the ship. A rhythmic, non-binary chanting overlaid with a sibilant whisper. It spoke of a different kind of freedom, an escape from the rigidity of the Emperor's truth, and a welcome for any being whose heart was already alienated. It spoke of chaos. The signal, subtle and alluring, was targeted precisely at beings of high psychic stress and moral disillusionment. The immediate aftermath of his defiance, the moral shock, and the political isolation had created the perfect breeding ground for this contagion. The lie of unity had been exposed, and now the whisper of chaos had begun.
The confinement aboard the Vengeful Spirit was less a prison and more an elaborate waiting room, but the psychological pressure was immense. Kal-El was at full physical capacity, but his power was nullified by the fact that the flagship was too dense, too armored, and too heavily manned to risk a breakout. Such an action would validate Horus's fear and provoke a potentially lethal engagement with the Primarchs. The air of the flagship, thick with imperial dogma and the anticipation of conquest, was suffocating to his spirit. It was during this forced inactivity that the whispers intensified. His super-hearing, usually a blessing that allowed him to monitor distress calls across a solar system, now became a curse. The chanting was a low, sibilant pulse beneath the roar of the ship's plasma drives, a mix of ancient Terran and incomprehensible xenos dialects, all devoted to a single, seductive theme: freedom from the shackles of absolute order. The source of the signal was tracked by Kal-El to the lowest cargo decks, a forgotten section of the Vengeful Spirit, where vast amounts of non-compliant artifacts and captured technology were stored, relics deemed too dangerous for immediate analysis, but too valuable to destroy. This was the dark underbelly of the Crusade, where the Emperor's truth was most flexible. Risking a subtle investigation, Kal-El used his superspeed during a designated rest period, moving with a blurred efficiency that bypassed all but the most immediate optical sensors. He located a hidden cargo hold where a small, illicit congregation had gathered. They were Imperial workers, serfs, and low-level navigators, the marginalized and the forgotten, led by a charismatic, gaunt man who had once been a minor tech priest. The air in the hold smelled of unwashed bodies, stale fear, and the sickly sweet scent of a forbidden incense. They were praying not to the Emperor, but to something that promised them choice. The former tech priest, who called himself Xarthus, was holding a small, pulsating, multifaceted crystal, a chaos artifact that radiated a low-level psychic energy. This energy was the source of the persistent whisper, a direct, targeted temptation. Xarthus noticed Kal-El's arrival instantly, as if he had been expected. The room fell silent, the smell of fear intensifying. "The Golden One comes to us," Xarthus declared, his voice a cracked, unnerving rasp. "The one who defied the false god's son. Welcome, stranger. We know your pain. We know your loneliness." Kal-El stepped forward, his eyes scanning the artifact. He saw the psychic corruption clearly, a subtle, parasitic energy that amplified existing doubts and fed on moral distress. "I know your pain," he agreed, his voice calm, "but I do not share your solution. This thing you hold is poisoning you. It offers choice, but delivers slavery." Xarthus laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "The Primarch called your mercy a liability. The Emperor confined you for daring to stand against slaughter. They offer you a gilded cage. We offer you the power to truly change things. You have the strength to overthrow them, but not the will. The gods of the warp know your moral struggle. They do not demand death, they demand freedom. Use your power, Golden One, to break the cage, and the galaxy is yours to save in your own way." This was the core temptation of chaos, perfectly calibrated for Kal-El, the freedom to act according to his moral code, unconstrained by the dogma of the Imperium. Horus had shown him the ultimate limits of his morality, and Xarthus was offering the ultimate liberation from that limit. The smell of fear and sickly sweet incense momentarily overwhelmed the industrial odors of the ship, creating a sickening sensory experience. Kal-El knew the true cost of that freedom. He had seen the ultimate corruption in other realities. "You are simply trading one master for a set of 4 far crueler ones," he countered, stepping closer to Xarthus. "The moment you embrace this freedom, you surrender your true self. The power you gain will only serve the ruinous ambition of the entities behind the veil. I will not choose despair." Before Xarthus could speak again, Kal-El moved, a precise, controlled burst of his heat vision, so fast and localized that it appeared as a flash of light vaporized the chaos crystal. The energy source of the whispers was instantly extinguished. The congregation gasped, collapsing to the floor as the psychic pull released them, leaving behind only the stark reality of their secret treason. Xarthus screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated psychic agony. He lunged at Kal-El, his fingers mutating instantly into grotesque, clawed extensions, the direct, immediate consequence of attempting to weaponize chaos. Kal-El caught his wrists effortlessly. He held the struggling, mutating former priest firmly, looking at him with pity. "You are a victim of an ancient evil," he whispered. He did not kill him, but subdued him with a controlled application of force, shattering his elbow joint and rendering him instantly unconscious. The smell of burning flesh and ozone filled the space.
The small cult was exposed, its members stunned and helpless. Kal-El, his moral code intact, had rejected the temptation of chaos. But the incident had given him a crucial piece of tactical information. The Emperor's fleet was not a clean, unified front. It was riddled with moral fault lines, doubts, and corruption, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. He secured the cultists and signaled the security detachment. The Luna Wolves were on their way. He allowed himself to be caught, knowing this would only reinforce his status as an uncontrollable element. But it also planted a seed of distrust in the minds of the Imperial command. The corruption was deeper than they thought. Kal-El realized that his only path to true agency was not to serve the Imperium or join its enemies, but to seek out a third, completely independent solution. His moral choice had been difficult, but it had preserved his autonomy, setting him on a collision course with a much more ancient, non-imperial enemy.
The exposure of the Chaos Cult aboard the Vengeful Spirit was handled with brutal efficiency by Horus and Abaddon. The sect was purged, and the deck was subjected to a thorough, ritualistic cleansing. Kal-El's role in exposing the corruption was noted, but interpreted by Horus not as an act of loyalty, but as a demonstration of his dangerous, independent power and knowledge of the forbidden. The smell of plasma discharges and ritualistic burning lingered in the lower decks for days. The atmosphere of suspicion on the flagship became absolute. Recognizing that he was now a liability to be studied rather than a tool to be used, Kal-El intensified his monitoring. His superhearing was now focused on all long-range Vox traffic and strategic planning. He overheard a critical exchange between Horus and a Mechanicum fabricator general regarding a new compliance target, a world designated Eterna 7. This world was deemed strategically valuable for its stable warp-shunning properties, but its local populace was hostile, having managed to stabilize a vast, powerful null field around their primary city, rendering all Imperial psychic and warp-based technology useless. The critical piece of information was the Mechanicum's belief that the null field's power source was an ancient, non-human energy matrix, theorized to be related to the lost, technologically advanced civilization that preceded mankind. They were preparing a massive land assault, a costly campaign simply to breach the perimeter and secure the power generator. Kal-El realized this was his opportunity. The null field was a local phenomenon, a limited, man-made counter to the warp. He was an anomaly powered by a physical star, not the psychic sea. The null field would likely have no effect on his Kryptonian biology. Furthermore, if the power source was non-human, it represented a potential solution. A non-imperial, non-warp-based source of power or technology that could give him the leverage he needed to save the people of Eterna 7 and ultimately find a way home or a new path for the Imperium's victims. Using his superspeed during a brief, calculated window when Horus was distracted by a strategic conference with 3 of his brother Primarchs, Leman Russ, Fulgrim, and Mortarion, Kal-El broke free of his quarters. The thick, plasteel walls were no match for a controlled burst of speed and strength, which he masked with the sonic vibration of a nearby engine cycle. He moved through the vengeful spirit like a ghost, past the astonished sensor arrays and the bewildered servitors, leaving behind only the faintest scent of ozone. He needed to be gone before the Primarchs realized he was even missing. He blasted out of the main hangar bay, accelerating to a velocity that was impossible for any craft in the fleet to track. He was a streak of red and blue against the star-dusted black. His destination, Eterna 7, a world already under siege. He arrived over Eterna 7's primary continent within hours, flying far ahead of the main Imperial fleet. The planet's atmosphere was distorted by the null field, creating an unnerving silence. No psychic chatter, no vox static, just the deep ambient sound of the planet's weather systems.
He breached the atmosphere and descended toward the primary target, the sprawling city of Nefandus. The massive null-field generator was visible at its center, a huge obsidian spire crackling with disruptive energy. The immediate, localized effect of the field was to silence the warp's chaotic noise, a sound Kal-El realized he had grown used to. The absence was jarring, but his powers remained completely functional. He landed near the generator, immediately encountering the local defense forces, a disciplined, determined militia armed with sophisticated energy-based rifles that cracked and hissed in the dry, silent air. They opened fire instantly. The rounds, advanced by human standards, disintegrated harmlessly against his impervious skin, the only evidence of their impact being a faint puff of ionized air and a brief metallic scent. Ignoring the small arms fire, Kal-El focused on the generator, the obsidian spire. It was protected by an interlocking sequence of force fields, the air around it smelling faintly of burnt rock and ozone. He pressed his hand against the spire, using his X-ray vision to penetrate the thick casing. What he saw was not the typical, crude mechanism of an ancient human defense system. The core of the generator was a vast, humming metallic network of unknown alloys, a self-repairing, self-optimizing engine that pulsed with a deep emerald light. It was utterly alien in design, cold, logical, and ancient beyond human reckoning. This was not a human defense. This was a Necron vault. The null field was not a defense against the Imperium's sorcery. It was a failsafe of a tomb world, designed to neutralize any warp-based incursion that might disturb the slumbering ancient race. The local populace were simply squatters on a massive, dormant military installation. As Kal-El was trying to interface with the technology, a section of the ground nearest the spire dissolved into shimmering green light. Out of the dust and light materialized a trio of figures that stood tall and impossibly thin. Necron warriors. Their metallic forms were sleek, utterly functional, and terrifyingly silent. Their eyes glowed a cold, malevolent green. The air around them smelled of dry dust and ozone. The Necrons raised their Gauss flares. They did not shout a challenge or offer a demand. They simply fired. The particle beams, designed to atomize targets at the molecular level, slammed into Kal-El's chest. The impact was significant, a focused energy strike far surpassing any Imperial weapon he had yet faced. It hurt. Not enough to pierce his skin, but enough to feel like a massive physical blow. The conflict had escalated immediately. Kal-El was no longer fighting a human conquest force. He was fighting an ancient xenos race of unparalleled technological sophistication. His power remained absolute, but he was facing an entity whose technology directly countered his physical durability on a molecular level. His initial agency, to find a better way to save humanity, had just led him directly into a catastrophic encounter with a much older, infinitely colder threat, far from the watchful eyes of Horus Lupercal.
The Necron warriors were an entirely new kind of threat for Kal-El. They were not driven by passion, faith, or madness, but by cold, relentless, robotic logic. The atmosphere around the Necrons was not one of fear, but of profound, ancient apathy, a chilling contrast to the zealous heat of the Great Crusade. The dry, dusty air of Eterna 7 was pierced by the hissing crackle of their Gauss weaponry. The initial volleys from the Necrons' flares had staggered Kal-El. The Necron technology was not designed to wound, but to disassemble at the molecular level, an attack that targeted the very essence of his Kryptonian biofield. He realized instantly that while he was invulnerable to kinetic and thermal weapons, this focused particle beam was the first weapon that genuinely posed a long-term threat to his physiology. He reacted not with force, but with precision and speed. The three Necron warriors moved with a measured, perfect coordination. Kal-El was faster. He launched himself forward, a blur of red and blue, closing the 20-meter distance in a fraction of a second. The smell of burnt rock and ancient metal was overpowering as he engaged them. His strategy was non-lethal, even against these non-sentient machines. He utilized his super strength not to crush, but to disable. He grabbed the nearest warrior's torso, his fingers not denting the living metal, but momentarily overwhelming the self-repair protocols. He rotated the torso sharply, shearing the head from the spine, a movement so swift it left a brief afterimage. He did not destroy the components, but separated them, rendering the machine inert. The second warrior continued firing, the beams tracking him with terrifying accuracy. Kal-El intercepted the projectile stream with a controlled blast of his freeze breath, creating a localized super-chilled cone of air that caused the beams to destabilize and dissipate before impact. He then slammed closed flat palm into the warrior's chest, the kinetic force staggering the construct. With a swift, surgical move, he tore out the power core, the humming, emerald-glowing heart of the machine, and tossed it into the deep crevasse created by his landing, effectively powering down the construct. The third warrior, more advanced than the others, clearly a higher-ranking Triarch Praetorian, attempted to escape, dissolving partially into the green light of its transdimensional displacement technology. Kal-El, unwilling to let it report his presence and capabilities, tracked the faint molecular displacement field with his enhanced senses. He unleashed a full-power blast of his heat vision, not to vaporize, but to overcharge the displacement mechanism. The resulting energy surge caused the Necron to instantly and violently rematerialize, but in a completely inert, fused lump of metal, its systems overloaded and locked. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the encounter had bought him little time. He now knew the null field generator was a vast Necron installation, and if he activated it, he would awaken the full tomb world. His agency here was now a dangerous tightrope walk, saving the local populace from the Imperial onslaught without triggering a catastrophic Necron awakening that would consume the entire sector. The smell of dust and cool metal settled back into the silent air. His new plan was born of desperation and the need to expedite his escape before Horus arrived. He ignored the Necron control systems. Instead, he used his X-ray vision to pinpoint the central energy conduit connecting the Necron generator to the planetary power grid, a massive underground arterial line. He needed a localized diversion on a massive, undeniable scale. Suddenly, his super hearing picked up a faint, distant roar in the void, an approaching wah. A massive orc fleet drawn to the sector by the gravitational pull of the Imperial Crusade and the allure of a good fight was hurtling toward Aeterna 7. This was not a small raiding party. This was a major orc force, a tide of scrap metal and green muscle that would devastate the sector. The sound was an escalating, triumphant chorus of engines, crude vox chatter, and pure, raw aggression. Kal-El realized the true, horrifying scale of the 41st millennium. The Imperium's fight for compliance was merely a localized skirmish in an endless, galaxy-wide war. He made a tough choice, prioritizing the immediate security of the local populace and his own survival. He unleashed a focused burst of energy, not heat vision, but a concussive energy pulse generated by the controlled release of his stored solar energy. The resulting explosion was not an act of destruction, but a distraction. A localized EMP that caused the Necron generator to flicker, its null field momentarily collapsing before immediately regenerating. The explosion was visible from space, a massive flare of green light from the center of the city.
This explosion would serve two purposes. It would signal a catastrophic failure to the arriving Imperial forces, forcing a temporary withdrawal, and, more importantly, it would draw the full, focused attention of the incoming Orc war. The Orcs would see the massive explosion and the flash of energy, interpreting it as the perfect, most exhilarating target for their battle frenzy. Kal-El then launched himself into the sky. He had a brief window before the Imperial fleet arrived and before the Orcs made planetfall. He needed to be far away, drawing the attention of both factions to a point of no return. He had traded a localized compliance action for a sector-wide war, but he had bought freedom for the people of Eterna 7, and critically, his own independence.
Kal-El flew, not in the direction of the Imperial fleet, but toward the incoming gargantuan Orc war. The Orc fleet was a chaotic, organic mass of cobbled-together starships, emitting a deafening, joyful roar that Kal-El could hear through the vast vacuum of space. The smell of hot, unrefined oil, stale fungus, and pure, aggressive psychic energy was already reaching his hypersensitive nostrils. His choice had been made. The best way to save the people of Eternavi and secure his own continued agency was to pit the enemies of the Imperium against each other and prove his necessity as an independent force of massive power. He positioned himself directly in the path of the largest Orc battle fleet, a mass of kilometer-long cruisers and brute ram ships, heading for the Eternavi system's vital warp navigational hub, a complex of strategically valuable void stations. This hub was a critical asset for the Imperial Crusade's supply lines. He could not ignore the impending disaster. The Orcs, drawn to the powerful energy signature of the Necron generator's momentary collapse, saw the lone flying figure as nothing less than a divine omen, a highly colored, incredibly fast challenge. A colossal Orc war boss, whose ship, the Death Chopper, was at the forefront of the attack, focused his crude targeting arrays on the flying figure. "That git is shiny! That git is fast! That git is the war's own prize! All Daka on the shiny git!" The Orcs opened fire. Hundreds of thousands of rounds of crude, massive Daka, everything from heavy cannon shells to plasma bolts and primitive rockets, hurtled toward Kal-El. The assault was a tidal wave of ordnance, an overwhelming display of raw, unfocused firepower. Kal-El unleashed the full, unimaginable scale of his speed and endurance. He became a one-man void defense system. He did not dodge the entire field of fire, which was impossible, but strategically intercepted the most damaging projectiles. He caught torpedoes, twisting them into inert metal coils before tossing them into the path of smaller Orc vessels, causing them to explode prematurely. He used concentrated beams of heat vision to vaporize plasma shots mid-flight, the energy dissipating into harmless light. The sheer, overwhelming noise of the explosions, the Orc cheering, and the grinding of massive, ramshackle ships was deafening, a true atmosphere of pure, chaotic conflict. But his action was having a much more profound effect than simple defense. The Orcs, witnessing a single figure withstand their entire fleet's opening salvo, were not terrified. They were ecstatic. Their collective psychic field, the Wa, began to surge, fueled by the sheer audacity and spectacle of the fight. The Orcs' crude technology, already unreliable, began to function better. Their guns fired straighter, their shields held stronger, and their ships seemed to move faster, driven by the collective, subconscious belief in the glorious, impossible battle. The battle raged for an hour. Kal-El did not destroy a single Orc vessel, a moral constraint that was becoming a severe tactical liability. He was merely pushing them back, diverting their course, and neutralizing their shots.
The sheer physical exertion was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The Necron weapon fire had been painful, but this was a sustained, massive, non-stop barrage that required him to use every fiber of his being simply to survive. Just as his endurance began to flag, the Imperial fleet arrived. Horus Lupercal, having tracked the massive orc wall, had ordered an immediate pursuit. He saw the battle on his main view screen, a lone figure of red and blue, a beacon of impossible light, fighting an entire orc fleet to a standstill, protecting the Imperial hub in the process. He saw a powerful act of defiance, a rogue agent who was nonetheless protecting the Imperium's interests. The anomaly is a liability, but his action is a calculated defense of our key asset. He is fulfilling a compliance duty with unprecedented efficiency against our direct orders. We cannot allow the orcs to win. Legions, prepare for immediate engagement. We shall let the golden anomaly drain the bulk of the orcs' initial fury, then capitalize on the distraction. Open fire on the main orc battle line. Do not target the anomaly. I want him alive. The Imperial fleet engaged with brutal, systematic efficiency. Focused salvos of Nova cannons and cyclonic torpedoes tore through the chaotic orc fleet, exploiting the tactical openings created by Kal-El's furious defense. The combined firepower of the two factions, one coordinated and the other chaotic, finally overwhelmed the orc vanguard. Kal-El, having successfully diverted the Wa from the Imperial hub and now witnessing the Imperial fleet's arrival, recognized his opportunity for escape. He pushed himself to an impossible speed, leaving the battlefield in a silent, sonic wake, heading away from the Imperial lines and the escalating conflict. He had performed an undeniable service for the Imperium, saving a critical asset and shattering a major orc advance. Yet, his position was more precarious than ever. He had defied the War Master, fought off the orcs, and only survived due to the tactical necessity of the Imperium. Now Horus saw him not as a moral challenge, but as a supremely dangerous, uncontrollable independent force whose utility came at the cost of the Emperor's absolute authority. This utility would not save him from the eventual reprisal. Horus Lupercal's decision was hardening. The golden anomaly was an acceptable tool only when it benefited the Imperial strategy and must be eliminated as soon as he became a strategic liability.
Shadow his power cast on the surrounding warp, which was interpreted by a powerful, dedicated navigator. A specialized task force, led by Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, known for their mastery of siegecraft and material science, and supported by a team of highly augmented Mechanica Magi, arrived in the system. Horus had wisely chosen a Primarch whose strength lay in technology and cold, unfeeling logic rather than a direct combat specialist. Perturabo, seeing Kal-El as merely a complex defensive problem, had brought a specialized weapon, born of a collaboration between the secretive Mechanicum and the captured, reluctant Dark Eldar homunculus. Kal-El's super hearing picked up the low-level, high-frequency distortion of their approach, a sound like metal tearing slowly. He broke cover, flying toward the incoming task force, intending to negotiate or, failing that, divert them. He encountered them over a dense, metalliferous moon. Perturabo's flagship, the Iron Blood, deployed the specialized weapon immediately. It was a colossal orbital platform, partially a Mechanicum forge construct and partially an organic bone and wire frame of Dark Eldar design that pulsed with a sickly red light. It was a focused, massive red sun energy field emitter. The field was not directed at the moon, but at Kal-El. As the crimson energy washed over him, Kal-El felt an instantaneous, terrifying sensation. His powers began to wane. The smell of the solar energy he was processing, usually a life-affirming warmth, turned cold and flat. The G-type solar radiation that constantly fed him was being filtered, blocked, and chemically altered into a form that was actively debilitating. It felt like his internal strength was being leached away, replaced by a crushing, leaden weight.
His invulnerability flickered. His speed dropped from supersonic to merely fast. His flight faltered, and he began to descend, fighting against the crushing feeling of a sudden forced return to baseline humanity. The complex nature of the energy field, a physical force and a psychic counter, was the ultimate execution of the Mechanicum's design against a solar-powered god. Perturabo, observing the result from the bridge of the Iron Blood, ordered the next phase. The subject is neutralized. Initiate capture protocols. Prepare the adamantium cage drop. Do not damage the specimen. I wish to analyze his physiological response to sustained red sun radiation. The Iron Warriors, clad in their trademark hazard-striped armor, descended in heavily armed drop pods, followed by Skitarii legions and combat servitors, all equipped with force field generators and exotic weaponry. The overwhelming coordinated assault left Kal-El no time to recover or counterattack. His only option was immediate, desperate flight. He crash-landed hard onto the metallic surface of the moon, the impact cracking the ground, an impact that, a few days prior, would have been a soft landing. Now the pain was agonizingly real. The air smelled of burnt metal and the raw, unrefined ozone of the red sun emitter. He ran, utilizing what little speed he had left, scrambling for cover amidst the moon's heavily cratered landscape. The Iron Warriors, methodical and relentless, pursued him with cold precision, their bolters firing suppressive blasts. One bolt shell, a non-lethal heavy-duty suppression round, struck him in the back. The impact staggered him, causing a searing pain that brought him to his knees, a sensation he had not felt since his Kryptonian adolescence. His power loss was near total. He was functioning at approximately 10% capacity, relying only on his trained combat skills and physical resilience. He reached a massive chasm, a sheer drop of kilometers into the moon's core. He had no way to cross it in his current state. He was cornered, exhausted, and functionally powerless against a relentless Primarch and his entire legion. As the Iron Warriors closed the ring, their advance inexorable, a flicker of light, unlike the red of the emitter or the orange of the moon's small sun, caught his eye. It was a pale, shimmering blue that seemed to bleed out of the very fabric of reality. A webway gate. It was a small, unstable portal, cleverly masked by the lunar magnetic field and only visible now due to the high energy fluctuations of the battle. A figure emerged from the gate, tall, slender, and clad in shimmering blue and bone-white armor. It was an Eldar Farseer, her cloak billowing in the non-existent atmosphere, her face a mask of serene, ancient concern. Her presence was like a breath of fresh, clean air in the industrial stink of the Iron Warriors. If you wish to survive the grasp of the Terran suns, Golden One, you will come with me now, a voice resonated in Kal-El's mind. Not a Vox transmission, but a precise, focused psychic projection. The strands of fate have brought you to us. We have need of a hero who knows how to suffer. It was a final, desperate choice. Surrender to the Primarch or trust the Xenos. He did not hesitate. The Iron Warriors were moments away from his position. Ignoring the pain, Kal-El threw himself toward the shimmering gate, leaping into the unknown. The last thing he saw as he dove through the Terran space was Perturabo's face, a look of cold, calculating fury as the Iron Warriors opened fire, too late to stop the escape. He had traded one form of captivity for another, placing his life in the hands of the most mysterious and ancient of the Imperium's enemies.
Kal-El stumbled out of the unstable webway gate, collapsing onto a floor made of smooth, bone-white ceramic. The air here was clean, tasting faintly of floral perfumes and ozone, a welcome relief from the metallic tang of the Iron Warrior's moon. The red sun field's crippling effect instantly began to subside. The ambient light of this hidden space, filtered through non-physical lenses, was sufficient to begin the slow process of cellular re-energization. He felt the familiar, dull thrum of solar power returning, but he was still weak. The Eldar Farseer, Lithair of Craftworld Alaitok, knelt beside him, her movements graceful and precise. Her eyes, filled with the terrifying clarity of one who sees the pathways of destiny, were fixed on his weary face. The internal architecture of this webway access point was elegant, with walls that seemed to shift and reform in subtle patterns, giving off an unsettling atmosphere of alien intelligence. "The Terran suns are relentless," Lithair stated, her voice a melodious whisper that resonated directly in his mind, bypassing the need for translation. The Imperium considers your very existence an anomaly that threatens their rigid timeline. Your refusal to kill is your greatest virtue and your gravest liability. The universe you have entered is one of absolute necessities, Golden One. Kal-El slowly rose, his super healing speeding the recovery from the Iron Warrior's suppression bolt. "You saved me," he acknowledged, his voice still hoarse with fatigue. "Why? The Imperium considers your people xenos, and you are not in the habit of saving human life." The smell of ancient resin and alien spices filled his nostrils. Lithanir stood, unfolding her elegant height, her eyes a memory of lost joys. The great enemy, the one you call Chaos, has its eyes fixed on this galaxy. The Primarch Horus is already showing the early, dark stains of their influence, a fate we Eldar have seen played out countless times. You, Kal-El, are an unlooked-for variable, a single point of absolute, incorruptible goodness in a universe of compromise and despair. She revealed the depth of her foresight. "We have observed your arrival and your conflicts. The Imperium seeks to use you as a tool. Chaos seeks to break you as a weapon. We, the Eldar, see you as a temporary focal point, a lever that can be used to shift the fate of this nascent Imperium and delay the rise of the great enemy, granting us centuries more to execute our own tragic plan." The Farseer then showed him a projection, a shimmering psychic image of the galactic map. It focused on a critical sector in the galactic north, a massive concentration of Imperial and Orc fleets, but a region also dangerously close to the Maelstrom, a notorious warp rift. Horus has been tasked with the compliance of this sector, but the Orcs are too numerous and the warp is too close. Without an external, unprecedented force, the Imperial forces will be consumed by the Orcs, and the resulting psychic scream will breach the warp rift, unleashing an unstoppable demon tide. The tragedy of that timeline is absolute. The Farseer's proposal was clear. "I will guide you out of the webway to a distant safe system near that sector, a system with a powerful yellow G-type star. There, you will fully recover your strength. In return, you must intervene in that conflict, not to win the war for Horus, but to break the Wa in a manner that ensures the smallest loss of life on both sides and keeps the demon in the maelstrom. You must buy the Imperium time to recover without becoming their captive again. You will be the unseen savior, the Golden Ghost." Kal-El looked at the psychic projection of the conflict, the tiny shifting blips representing billions of lives. He understood the moral complexity. He would be directly aiding the Imperium that had tried to imprison him, but he would be saving an infinitely greater number of lives from both Orc slaughter and demonic incursion. His choice was purely pragmatic morality. "Show me the path to your star," Kal-El agreed, the light returning fully to his eyes, the smell of clean air invigorating him. He was no longer a soldier of the Great Crusade or a victim of the Primarchs. He was an independent agent, utilizing an Eldar prophecy to execute a critical, morally driven mission, a man racing the clock toward a massive, escalating conflict where his refusal to kill would be the ultimate test of his power.
The journey through the webway was a blur of shifting geometries and psychic echoes, but the destination, guided by the Farseer's precise coordinates, was perfect. Kal-El emerged into a system dominated by a huge, vibrant yellow star, a stellar furnace of pure, life-giving solar energy. He immediately ascended into the sun's corona,
basking in the intense, uninterrupted radiation. The effects were instantaneous and profound. The lingering weakness from the red sun field evaporated. His invulnerability returned, stronger and more resilient than before. His speed became almost limitless. The constant ambient psychic noise of the galaxy, usually a distraction, now focused into a clear picture of the coming conflict. He was operating at 100% capacity and beyond, the ultimate Sun Eater, an entity of absolute solar power ready to engage the galaxy's most devastating war machine. The air in this system was pure vacuum, the smell of solar plasma and cold metal the only sensory input. His target was the Perseus A sector, a region now engulfed by a massive orc Wa and the converging forces of the Imperium. Horus Lupercal had tasked a highly specialized, ruthless force to recapture the sector and, more importantly, to capture the Golden Anomaly. This force was led by the Primarch Leman Russ, the Wolf King of the Space Wolves Legion. Russ, known for his directness, ferocity, and absolute loyalty to the Emperor, saw Kal-El as a heretical beast that needed to be caged or culled. A dangerous, self-righteous xenos defying the rightful rule of the Emperor. Kal-El flew towards the conflict at a speed that transcended the limitations of warp travel, moving through the void like a bullet forged of starlight. He arrived at the edge of the Perseus A conflict zone just as the battle reached its terrifying climax. The scene was pure 40K horror. Hundreds of orc ships engaged in close quarters brutal warfare with the Imperial Navy, the void lit by the explosions of plasma and macro cannons. The air was thick with the desperate, overlapping vox chatter of the Imperial Guard and the guttural, maniacal cheering of the orcs. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the conflict was breathtaking, a symphony of destruction. Kal-El's primary objective, as agreed with the Farseer, was to break the Wa in a way that would disperse the orcs without total annihilation, thus preventing the psychic surge that would open the maelstrom and unleash the daemons. He knew he could not destroy the orc fleet. The scale was too vast, and the orcs thrived on combat. He had to hit them where their fanaticism was rooted, the belief in the unstoppable nature of their collective aggression. He aimed not for the ships, but for the heart of the orc psychic field. He identified the flagship of the orc war boss, a colossal, ramshackled vessel with a massive, crudely installed Geller field equivalent that was amplifying the Wa energy. He flew through the field of battle, ignoring the exploding ships and the focused Imperial fire, which did not register on his enhanced form. He used his super speed to bypass all defense systems, cutting into the orc flagship like a surgical knife. He did not fire a shot. Instead, he utilized his full strength in a complex maneuver. He found the central reactor core, a massive, unstable mass of scrap metal and volatile fuel. He grabbed the core, using his physical strength to exert a precise, opposing pressure on the core's energetic output. He simultaneously used a high-frequency, precisely modulated burst of his super breath to cool the reactor's main conduit to near absolute zero. The result was not a chaotic explosion, but a massive, instantaneous, and catastrophic system failure. The orc flagship did not explode, it went dead, instantly. All systems, weapons, propulsion, lights, and most importantly, the massive psychic amplifier shut down, turning the colossal vessel into an inert, lifeless hulk. The silence was palpable, a vacuum of sound in the maelstrom of battle. The immediate effect on the surrounding orc fleet was one of profound collective psychic shock. The sudden, silent, absolute failure of their biggest, best ship, not by explosion, but by silence, was something alien to the orc psyche. It broke their momentum. The collective Wa flickered, then abruptly retreated. The sight of their champion's ship going inexplicably dead was not glorious, it was weird. And orcs hate weird. Before the orc fleet could recover its collective will, a second fleet arrived,
Not the daemons of the Maelstrom, but the Imperial forces of the Space Wolves. Leman Russ saw the massive, inert flagship and the immediate confusion of the Orc fleet. "The beast has done our work for us," Russ growled over the Vox, his voice a gravelly, triumphant challenge. "It has confused the Orcs. Now we strike. Target the command ships. No mercy. And find the golden beast. I will hunt this arrogant anomaly myself." Kal-El knew he was now facing the relentless fury of a Primarch whose moral and physical philosophy was directly opposed to his own. He was the most dangerous threat to the Imperium's ideals, and the Primarch was here to eliminate him. The air began to smell of ozone, hot plasma, and the sharp, clean scent of the Space Wolves' oath bindings.
Leman Russ, an entity of pure, primal strength and fanatical loyalty, launched himself from the prow of his flagship, the Horafenkel, into the void. Clad in his Baroque, wolf-pelt-adorned power armor and carrying the legendary great axe, Mjolnir, he descended toward the silent Orc flagship where Kal-El was preparing his escape. The sight of the Primarch, a being of myth and devastating combat prowess, was a terrifying spectacle. The clash was inevitable, a collision between two ideals of protection, one based on absolute, necessary violence, and the other on absolute, necessary mercy. Kal-El flew up from the inert Orc flagship to meet him. He knew that a conflict with a Primarch was the ultimate escalation, a confrontation that would define his time in this universe. The Primarch's entire being radiated aggression, and the surrounding void was filled with the metallic scent of plasma and the musk of his wolf-like legionaries. "You are the golden anomaly," Russ roared, his voice broadcast on all available channels, a direct challenge. "You are a false god and a xenos filth who defies the light of the Emperor. You have shown your strength, but you lack the will to end the suffering. Prepare to face the Emperor's justice, beast." Kal-El met the charge, his movement a blinding streak of red and blue. He refused to attack first. "I am a protector. I refuse to be judged by a tyrant." Russ attacked with a speed that shocked even Kal-El's enhanced senses. Mjolnir swung in a massive sweeping arc, a blow that could fell a battle tank. Kal-El did not dodge. He met the attack head-on, his forearm raised in a defensive posture. The impact was cataclysmic. A blinding flash of kinetic energy ripped through the void, creating a massive momentary gravity wave that distorted the ships around them. Kal-El felt the full, unbridled strength of the Primarch, the combined force of his demigod physique, his power armor, and his legendary weapon. The shockwave rattled his bones and pushed him back a kilometer, but his skin remained unbroken. The immediate realization was that Leman Russ was stronger than any foe he had ever fought, a true equal in raw physical power. But Kal-El had one advantage. His refusal to kill allowed him to utilize a precision of power that Russ, bound by his nature, could not. The battle became a desperate, high-speed ballet of defense and containment. Russ fought with a primal, chaotic fury, chainsaws, bolters, and the sweeping arcs of his axe. Kal-El used his speed to continually maneuver Russ into predictable attack patterns. He used his heat vision not to burn, but to weld Russ's axe to the Primarch's shoulder guard in a microsecond burst of instantaneous high heat, temporarily immobilizing his main weapon. Russ roared in frustration, tearing the axe free with a sheer savage application of strength that damaged his own power armor. The Space Wolves, seeing their Primarch challenged, began to descend from the Horafenkel. Elite Wolf Guard, Terminators, and a host of Fenracian-born Astartes. The air began to fill with the barks and howls of the oncoming assault, the smell of burnt lubricant and fear. Kal-El knew he could not sustain this defensive posture against an entire legion, nor could he retreat without proving Russ correct in his assertion of his cowardice. He had to end the fight without taking a life. His final move was an act of non-lethal, absolute power. As Russ charged again, the Primarch's mind consumed by battle lust, Kal-El waited until the last moment. He caught Russ's extended gauntlet, planting his feet against the hull of a nearby freighter, establishing a point of resistance against the colossal momentum of the Primarch. Then he unleashed, not a physical blow, but a sustained, full-power burst of super breath, a localized, focused blast of atmospheric pressure and supercooling that was akin to a hyper-tornado. The blast enveloped the Primarch entirely. Russ's power armor, designed to withstand the heat of plasma, could not compensate for the instantaneous, catastrophic drop in temperature. The air around Russ condensed into blinding white ice. The Primarch was encased, not trapped, but momentarily paralyzed in a massive, several-ton sheath of ultra-compressed, super-chilled ice. His armor's movement servos locked, his vocalizers were silenced. He was alive, unharmed, but utterly frozen in place, a magnificent, infuriated statue of ice floating in the void. Kal-El, his strength momentarily depleted by the exertion, hovered over the motionless Primarch. He had won the tactical battle by refusing to join the violence. He had beaten a Primarch without a single lethal strike. "You are strong, Leman Russ," Kal-El voxed, his voice filled with weariness but absolute conviction, ensuring his words were heard by the Space Wolves. "But your strength is flawed by your willingness to kill. Unity cannot be forged by a sword alone." With his objective complete, the Wa'ad dispersed, the Primarch neutralized, and the Maelstrom secured, Kal-El turned and fled the system, leaving the Space Wolves in the impossible position of having to rescue their frozen, furious Primarch. He left behind a clear, irrefutable message. A greater power had entered the galaxy, a power that could defeat the Emperor's sons without resorting to their brutal methods. His action was an irreversible consequence, a moment that would force the Emperor to confront the one thing he could not conquer, the possibility of a moral alternative.
The immediate aftermath of the battle reverberated across the Imperial command structure with the force of a cyclonic torpedo. A Primarch of the Emperor's legions, Leman Russ, had been defeated, not by a xenos superweapon or a sorceress plot, but by a single individual who had used his own power to incapacitate rather than destroy. The resulting shame and confusion within the Space Wolves Legion were immense. The tactical smell of the burning void was now laced with the acrid scent of political crisis. Horus Lupercal, already deeply troubled by the early whispers of chaos, received the reports with a cold, terrifying calm. He ordered the immediate retrieval and defrosting of his brother Primarch and suppressed all non-essential records of the incident. The Golden Anomaly's action was the ultimate challenge to the Imperial truth. It proved that the Emperor's ruthless pragmatism was not the only path to victory. Back on Terra, within the throne room of the nascent Imperium, the Emperor of Mankind observed the events not through a Vox feed, but through the overwhelming power of his psychic foresight. He saw the threads of fate surrounding Kal-El, and they were the purest gold, untainted by the great enemy and shimmering with potential. He saw that Kal-El was not a tool, but a catalyst, a living test of his entire philosophy. The Emperor had always preached the Imperial truth, that the universe was a place of cold material science, and that humanity's only salvation lay in unification through absolute, non-negotiable dominion. He had outlawed all faith, all superstition, and all moral complexity in favor of the sword. Kal-El, a being whose power was godlike and whose morality was absolute, shattered that truth simply by existing and choosing mercy over murder. The Emperor realized that if he crushed Kal-El, he would validate the whispers of chaos, proving that only cynical power and brutality could survive. If he allowed Kal-El to continue, the very foundations of the Great Crusade would be destabilized by the mere idea of a kinder path. He chose a third, irreversible option. He would not capture or crush Kal-El, but he would assimilate the idea of him into the Imperial's core doctrine, perverting the purity of the act for his own political and theological stability. The Emperor convened a closed psychic council with the most trusted of his Primarchs, Horus, Sanguinius, and Rogel Dorn. The atmosphere was one of silent, crushing gravitas. The air of the throne room, usually filled with the Emperor's pure psychic light, now carried a subtle, dangerous scent of compromise. The Emperor projected into their minds a thought that resonated with the force of 1,000 sermons. The Golding Anomaly has shown us a truth we cannot ignore. He is a being of unparalleled power who chooses not to take life. His existence is an engine of faith, not science. He cannot be eliminated without creating a martyr whose legend would fuel the very superstitions I seek to erase. Therefore, we must co-opt his legend. The imperial truth is modified this day. You will announce that the Golden Anomaly was not a xenos, but a celestial champion, a unique avatar of the unified human spirit, a vision of the absolute physical purity achievable through the Emperor's guidance. His miraculous, non-lethal power is a demonstration of the Emperor's ultimate desire, to save all humanity. His flight is a test, a sign that humanity must prove its worth by defeating its enemies through the Emperor's grace, not simply through brute force. Horus immediately saw the political genius of the move. It turned a catastrophic defeat into a propaganda coup, assimilating an uncontrollable external threat into a foundational myth. It twisted Kal-El's pure act of mercy into a theological imperative designed to inspire the masses, as even the legions continued their brutal work. This single decision was a profound act of moral corruption that would have unimaginable long-term consequences. The Emperor, in a single cold calculus, reintroduced the very idea of a deified champion and a miraculous event into the imperial truth, the first subtle crack in the scientific, anti-religious core of his ideology. This act would lay the psychological groundwork for the eventual imperial cult, decades before the seeds of the Horus heresy had fully blossomed. Kal-El, meanwhile, was far from the conflict, utilizing a temporary bolt hole in a distant, unaligned system. He rested, his power fully restored, looking back at the glimmering core of the galaxy. He had won a battle for his moral code, but he had lost the war against the Imperial's ability to corrupt and assimilate. His ultimate goal remained: a third path, a sanctuary for the victims of the Crusade. He was now an unspoken legend, a ghost of golden light whose actions had already irrevocably altered the destiny of the entire human race.
Kal-El, the Golden Anomaly, did not return to the main flow of the Great Crusade. Having successfully fragmented the Orc Wa and neutralized a Primarch without resorting to lethal force, he understood his new status. He was a living paradox, a legend that the Imperium had to simultaneously venerate and fear. The air in his new sanctuary, a rogue planetoid orbiting a dim, stable star, smelled of nothing but pure, cold space, the only environment that offered true solitude. His subsequent actions were driven by the moral imperative that had defined his entire life: protection. He did not seek to overthrow the Emperor, nor did he join any Xenos faction. Instead, he utilized his full, unconstrained power and the knowledge gained from the Eldar Farseer to forge his independent path, a secret third front in the galaxy's endless conflict. He began the construction of a hidden sanctuary, a space far from the Great Crusade's expanding front. He located an abandoned, resource-rich cluster of asteroid remnants on the fringe of the galactic north, an area deemed non-viable due to unstable warp routes. With his immense speed, he diverted hundreds of massive, inert asteroids into controlled orbits around the stable, energy-dense core. He used his heat vision with the precision of a master architect, melting and fusing the rock and metal into a single, cohesive, shielded construct, a refuge colony of impossible scale and perfect structural integrity. The entire operation took a mere few weeks. His super hearing became a radar of compassion. He monitored distress calls, not from the Imperial fleet, but from the Vox channels of worlds that had been declared non-compliant, but not yet purged. These were the victims of the Crusade, the independent human worlds, the techno-barbarian tribes, and the human xenos allies who were slated for exterminatus or summary execution. He would arrive on these worlds, moving with a velocity that defied detection. He did not fight the Imperial Guard or the Astartes legions. He simply bypassed them. Using his super speed, he would airlift entire populations, hundreds of thousands of people at a time, from drop zones and execution pits, transporting them silently, non-violently, and instantaneously to his hidden sanctuary. The sheer logistical feat was only possible due to his absolute, restored power. He gave his new colony a name from his past, Kandor Terra, the City of Hope. Here, the former victims of the Imperium, now a diverse, complex population of different human cultures and even a few harmless xenos species, lived under the protection of the Golden Anomaly. He enforced only one law, the Kryptonian creed of peace, coexistence, and mutual respect. The Imperium, meanwhile, could only track the consequences of his actions. Worlds that were supposed to be purged were found completely empty. Their populations vanished without a trace, leaving behind only confused legions and stunned inquisitors. The only evidence was the occasional blurred scorch mark from an object moving at relativistic speed, and the lingering psychological impact of a miracle. Horus Lupercal officially listed the events as celestial intervention, a convenient fiction based on the Emperor's new doctrine, using the celestial champion to explain the miracles he couldn't control. The last of his interventions was perhaps his most meaningful. He intervened on a world that was set to be the next target for a compliance led by the Space Wolves. He saved the population, but left one single object on the world's most prominent mountain. A perfect, unadorned shield of gold, bearing the simple, unmistakable sigil of the House of El. It was a message to Lemon Russ, not a declaration of war, but a symbol of defiance and an alternative moral path. The symbol remained, too brilliant and too resonant with the new imperial doctrine, to be destroyed. Kal-El remained in his self-imposed sanctuary, a living legend to the grateful peoples of Kandor Terra. His presence had not stopped the Great Crusade, but it had created a massive internal pressure point. His actions had forced the Emperor to introduce the seeds of faith and the concept of an invincible champion into the heart of the imperial truth. The idea of the Golden Anomaly would linger in the minds of the Emperor's servants, a silent question mark over the absolute necessity of brutality, and would, in the centuries to come, be unknowingly warped and integrated into the very fabric of the ecclesiastry, the ultimate irony. Kal-El had not conquered the 41st millennium, but he had successfully corrupted its core philosophy with the simple, dangerous idea of hope. His war was not fought with a sword, but with a selfless moral code. And in the dark future, that was perhaps the most powerful weapon of all. The price of victory was written not in blood, but in the alteration of a galactic philosophy. Kal-El, the Golden Anomaly, had successfully navigated the impossible gauntlet of the Great Crusade. He had defeated a Primarch and scattered a Wa without compromising his absolute moral code, utilizing his full, terrifying power for the sole purpose of protection. The Emperor of Mankind, faced with an entity he could not crush and whose very existence threatened the logic of his conquest, made the profound choice to assimilate the anomaly's legend. By framing Kal-El's acts of mercy as celestial intervention, the Emperor inadvertently injected the virus of faith into the heart of the imperial truth, laying the psychological foundation for the future imperial cult and the very concept of a divine champion. Superman's new status is that of the galaxy's ultimate independent protector, a living, uncatchable legend who operates from a hidden sanctuary, a Kandor Terra of survivors.
He has carved out a moral territory in a universe of amoral extremes, proving that a third path of absolute non-lethal defense is possible, if only for the select few he can save. His story ends not with a victory over chaos or the Imperium, but with the creation of an enduring, hidden symbol of hope, a golden shield in the crushing darkness. The Great Crusade continued its work of conquest, but now it carried a secret, dangerous vulnerability. The populace believed in a champion who was kinder than their god. The seeds of the future, a future where faith would eclipse science, and where the Emperor himself would become the very object of the superstition he sought to eradicate, had been planted. The Emperor protects. More stories await.
Kal-El, the Golden Anomaly, did not return to the main flow of the Great Crusade. Having successfully fragmented the Orc War and neutralized a Primarch without resorting to lethal force, he understood his new status. He was a living paradox, a legend that the Imperium had to simultaneously venerate and fear. The heir in his new sanctuary, a rogue planetoid orbiting a dim, stable star, smelled of nothing but pure cold space, the only environment that offered true solitude. His subsequent actions were driven by the moral imperative that had defined his entire life: protection. He did not seek to overthrow the Emperor, nor did he join any xenos faction. Instead, he utilized his full, unconstrained power and the knowledge gained from the Eldar Farseer to forge his independent path, a secret third front in the galaxy's endless conflict. He began the construction of a hidden sanctuary, a space far from the Great Crusade's expanding front. He located an abandoned, resource-rich cluster of asteroid remnants on the fringe of the galactic north, an area deemed non-viable due to unstable warp routes. With his immense speed, he diverted hundreds of massive, inert asteroids into controlled orbits around a stable, energy-dense core. He used his heat vision with the precision of a master architect, melting and fusing the rock and metal into a single, cohesive, shielded construct, a refuge colony of impossible scale and perfect structural integrity. The entire operation took a mere few weeks. His superhearing became a radar of compassion. He monitored distress calls, not from the Imperial fleet, but from the Vox channels of worlds that had been declared non-compliant, but not yet purged. These were the victims of the Crusade, the independent human worlds, the techno-barbarian tribes, and the human xenos allies who were slated for exterminatus or summary execution. He would arrive on these worlds, moving with a velocity that defied detection. He did not fight the Imperial Guard or the Astartes legions. He simply bypassed them. Using his super speed, he would airlift entire populations, hundreds of thousands of people at a time, from the drop zones and execution pits, transporting them silently, non-violently, and instantaneously to his hidden sanctuary. The sheer logistical feat was only possible due to his absolute restored power. He gave his new colony a name from his past, Condor Terra, the City of Hope. Here, the former victims of the Imperium, now a diverse, complex population of different human cultures and even a few harmless xeno species, lived under the protection of the Golden Anomaly. He enforced only one law: the Kryptonian creed of peace, coexistence, and mutual respect. The Imperium, meanwhile, could only track the consequences of his actions. Worlds that were supposed to be purged were found completely empty. Their populations vanished without a trace, leaving behind only confused legions and stunned inquisitors. The only evidence was the occasional blurred scorch mark from an object moving at relativistic speed and the lingering psychological impact of a miracle.
Horus Lupercal officially listed the events as celestial intervention, a convenient fiction based on the Emperor's new doctrine, using the celestial champion to explain the miracles he couldn't control. The last of his interventions was perhaps his most meaningful. He intervened on a world that was set to be the next target for a compliance led by the Space Wolves. He saved the population, but left one object on the world's most prominent mountain. A perfect, unadorned shield of polished gold, bearing the simple, unmistakable sigil of the House of El. It was a message to Leman Russ, not a declaration of war, but a symbol of defiance and an alternative moral path. The symbol remained, too brilliant and too resonant with the new imperial doctrine to be destroyed. Kal-El remained in his self-imposed sanctuary, a living legend to the grateful peoples of Kandor Terra. His presence had not stopped the crusade, but it had created a massive internal pressure point. His actions had forced the Emperor to introduce the seeds of faith and the concept of an invincible champion into the heart of the imperial truth. The idea of the golden anomaly would linger in the minds of the Emperor's servants, a silent question mark over the absolute necessity of brutality, and would, in the centuries to come, be unknowingly warped and integrated into the very fabric of the ecclesiastiki, the ultimate irony. Kal-El had not conquered the 41st millennium, but he had successfully corrupted its core philosophy with the simple, dangerous idea of hope. His war was not fought with a sword, but with a selfless moral code. And in the dark future, that was perhaps the most powerful weapon of all. Word count, 1029. The price of victory was written not in blood, but in the alteration of a galactic philosophy. Kal-El, the golden anomaly, had successfully navigated the impossible gauntlet of the Great Crusade. He had defeated a Primarch and scattered a Wa without compromising his absolute moral code, utilizing his full, terrifying power for the sole purpose of protection. The Emperor of mankind, faced with an entity he could not crush and whose very existence threatened the logic of his conquest, made the profound choice to assimilate the anomaly's legend. By framing Kal-El's acts of mercy as celestial intervention, the Emperor inadvertently injected the virus of faith into the heart of the imperial truth, laying the psychological foundation for the future imperial cult and the very concept of a divine champion. Superman's new status is that of the galaxy's ultimate independent protector, a living, uncanchable legend who operates from a hidden sanctuary, a Kandor Terra of survivors. He has carved out a moral territory in a universe of amoral extremes, proving that a third path of absolute non-lethal defense is possible, if only for the select few he can save. His story ends not with a victory over chaos or the Imperium, but with the creation of an enduring, hidden symbol of hope, a golden shield in the crushing darkness. The Great Crusade continued its work of conquest, but now it carried a secret, dangerous vulnerability. The populace believed in a champion who was kinder than their god. The seeds of the future, a future where faith would eclipse science, and where the Emperor himself would become the very object of the superstition he sought to eradicate, had been planted.